Yay, we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Lisa Neer, mezzo soprano and composer, and I am here live with violinist Catherine Rinderknecht Moritz from Iowa. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hey, doing well.
Yay! I'm so glad to have you and to have a chance to talk to you about what's been going on for you and about your role in our upcoming concert of Wind and Waves that's coming up on the 31st of January. So, first, just can you tell us a little bit about your background? You play the violin. How did that get going for you? And what is your story so far as a musician?
Sure. Okay. I'll try to keep this really brief because when I tell stories, it's like a lot of background and then like a very small chunk of actual story. It's just who I am as a person, always has been. But I came to the violin at the really young age of 4.5. So actually, this last weekend, I celebrated my 25th anniversary since my first lesson.
Wow.
I freak my students out when I tell them that because they're like, "Whoa, you're old," and I'm like, "I know, I am." So we laugh, but and then I blow their minds about things that they don't have anymore, like landlines. Anyway, so I came to the violin, like I said, when I was 4.5. I was a Suzuki Method student first at the Cedar Rapids Symphony School before it was the Orchestra Iowa School. So that really is a ways back. Then through Purcell School in Iowa City. And then I pursued my bachelor's in music degree at the University of Iowa. I have a master's from OU, so University of Oklahoma. And now I am ABD, all but dissertation, finishing my doctorate at the University of Iowa. So I'm almost done.
That's awesome. And what kind of repertoire do you like the most?
Oh my goodness. I love everything, but I love collaborative repertoire. So I love working with other people. That brings me so much joy. Whether that's working with other musicians or composers. It gets a little creative then because I've done a lot of work with solo violin music with composers. So people are like, wait, you're by yourself? That's collaborative? And I'm like, yeah, it's collaborative with the composer. That's the fun part.
Absolutely. I love it. And absolutely. I think that relationship between the performer and the composer is so dynamic. It's so exciting. It's why I love to compose. And you have a particular project related to that collaborative passion for composers, the There Is No Comfort Zone project. And that's kind of gone on a little bit of a journey. So would you tell us about that?
Sure thing. So that project, oh my goodness. So it's been 5 years now almost since I gave that performance, but There Is No Comfort Zone came out of, I needed a name for a project that I had no name for. This project came about during my year in between my master's degree and when I started my doctorate. And so I was looking for things to keep me creative and practicing as I was teaching and playing in orchestras that year. And I asked friends of mine to write me solo pieces for the violin. And like I said, I love collaborating, but sometimes there are things that get in the way of collaborative performances. They can be financial, they can be limitations on instrumentation or venues. And so I wanted solo pieces so I could play them anywhere I could go. And because I'm from rural Iowa, the first thing that popped into my head that's kind of crazy is I could play them in a barn.
Of course,
if I wanted to. I have not actually played. I don't think I've actually played in a barn yet.
Oh well, to be continued.
I'll change that. To be changed, but not yet. So, I played all of these pieces. They're wonderful, and I felt all this momentum then as I was going into my doctorate. And my goal was to actually do another round of that, collaborate with more composers, as I had, built up this excitement about it. But I wanted to wait till I got my bearings a little bit into my doctorate and just I had to move back to Iowa, figure out what I was doing. And so the project kind of sat for a year. And during that time, the world kind of turned into a different place. I turned into a different human. Not literally, that would be weird. But I did a lot of growing. And the world did a lot of growing, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. And my aims for the project shifted slightly. So I'd been focusing on how there was no comfort zone, as in I was taking all of these composers out of their compositional and artistic comfort zone by writing just for a solo instrument and writing short pieces. I was taking myself out of my comfort zone by playing sometimes music that wasn't in an aesthetic I would always choose. And that was so good for me. It sharpened my musicality and my rhythm. Oh my goodness. And my rhythm. That was a big thing. But it also took my audiences out of their comfort zone because I was presenting music that was this beautiful classical music that didn't sound anything like what they conceived of classical music to be. And I was owning it right away, saying, hey, this is okay. This is going to be challenging. And actually, my favorite comment after that concert I gave 5 years ago was from my dad, who was like, okay, you know how there's outside the box? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, there is no box with this.
I love that.
And I'm like, great. That's the point.
Yes.
That's entirely the point. Awesome.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. So then what's the status of the project now?
So the project now has completely morphed into something different. I was focused then as I was, approaching round 2 of There Is No Comfort Zone of taking it to Iowa. So for me, that means trying to find unusual places to play. So like a barn, and I'm from Iowa. So we do everything in every county when we decide to do a project. It's just what we do. There's, politically that's a thing. Artistically, it's a thing. And then with really weird projects.
It's true.
It's just like absolutely silly. Like,
it's totally true.
There's a guy, I forget his name. He's awesome. But he did this thing where he would run a mile and then drink a beer in every county in Iowa.
Yes.
And I'm like,
I heard about this person.
Cool. I have no desire to do the running part because I'm not a runner, but that cool. And then he would talk about like the area where he ran. So it was this project like talking about different places in Iowa too. And I always thought that was kind of cool. So that was in the back of my mind. But then I started thinking about the audiences that I wanted to reach and the tensions I felt in myself being a person from a small town in Iowa, but living in one of the larger cities in Iowa that has a completely different vibe. So at this time I was living in Iowa City, and Iowa City, I don't feel is like almost any other place in Iowa. It's very different than if you go to all of the different small towns. Most small towns feel a lot alike. And by small town, I mean a town that does not have a stoplight.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's an actual small town.
Yes.
And usually that's roughly around like 2,000 people is when they first start to get stoplights. Maybe 2,500. Just to put a numerical ballpark for someone who might not be as familiar with the area.
Sure.
So I became interested in how those two parts of myself were in tension. So playing music with challenging aesthetics in rural Iowa would be difficult sometimes to hear. New, it's unfamiliar. But then in the academic realm, when I lived in Iowa City, that was a fairly common occurrence, especially with the university's Center for New Music. It's a regular thing. And so while it might still be challenging, it's challenged regularly. Yeah. So I started thinking about that. And then I also started thinking about different attitudes based on where people live. And different values that might arise just from having different circumstances. And one thing, as I started to do some reading about these things, is I came to this idea that there's actually a lot of shared things among different populations of people. We just focus on what's different. So the project was sort of reborn and it became Shared Stories.
Awesome.
And Shared Stories in and of itself, let me actually, if I'm going to read my actual, this is what this is.
Yeah.
Shared Stories is a project to commission and record new pieces of contemporary unaccompanied violin music and then perform them in every county in Iowa within the next few years.
Awesome.
So my goal with this is, through these performances, are to negotiate issues of place, identity, and values, by creating an opportunity to discover connections between contemporary violin music and our own stories. So that's kind of what I'm going for with this.
That's awesome. What a journey. And you know what I love too is I think sometimes when people see a performance or an album or a project, they might assume that we knew from the very beginning as artists, yes, this was completely full-fledged from the moment I first thought of it, and it did not change. And actually, what I love is like you had an idea and you made something happen, and then you had another idea to like make it happen more so and to continue on one side, and then you morphed, and it's a living process. And that's what contemporary music performers living right now and really listening and being open to changing direction, changing their mind about what they think that direction is going to be. Like that's the power to me of contemporary art, is it's actually in relationship to our communities. It's not a museum piece. And I love that. And I think that there's a lot that your story offers to people who enjoy listening and attending concerts and listening to music, and also to musician colleagues and the next generation thinking about how can I create a project that, you know, start, do the work, you know, and then you pivoted, and that's great, and you transformed it. So
yeah. Well, I think it's kind of fun too. Like you were part of that pivot. We were already talking about collaborating together before the pivot actually happened. And it's once the pivot happened that I was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's do this.
Yes. Yeah, we overlapped at Iowa. Was it by like a year? Twice. Yeah, we overlapped when we were finishing your undergrad and I was starting my doctorate. And then as you came back, we also overlapped before I moved to Portland. And so we had that chance to become friends. And I had this opportunity to write for your project, the piece that people will hear on the concert of Wind and Waves that's happening on January 31st. So my last question for you is to share with us, what should people know? What do you want to share with them about this piece Within a Dome of Sky that they'll get to hear?
Oh my goodness. Well, first, I love the piece. And I'm not saying that because I'm on an interview with you. No, I really, truly love the piece. Actually, as it stands right now, I'm planning to actually have it be the first piece on my album because I love how it sets a beautiful scene. Yeah, and I know in your program notes you were inspired by, you know, mountains from your home state, and then the prairies and open fields of Iowa from your time adjuncting and driving everywhere, which if you drive anywhere in Iowa, yes, you will see open spaces.
You will.
Highly recommend if you want something excessively interesting in eastern central Iowa without going like west and northeast. Tama County has awesome hills.
Yes.
Very awesome hills. Highly recommend. And I can't believe I'm saying that because like my county directly to the east is like not hilly and not nearly as exciting. And it makes me super sad that it's not my county. But gotta love on it.
Close enough.
Right. It is close. But yeah, so Within a Dome of Sky sets this beautiful scene, and every gesture, melodic, effectual, something that's just, you know, an effect, it creates this mood, and I love it. It reminds me of being outside and wandering, and I love that. I'm a huge fan of wandering outside and taking walks. I mean, I've done the whole stress walk thing, and that's great, but being out in wider spaces and being able to walk is just glorious.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm so glad you hear that in the music because, you know, I do come from the Pacific Northwest, which is where I am now. I'm now back. But during my time in Kansas and then in Iowa, you know, I really developed this appreciation for the beauty of the Midwest and the beauty of the rolling hills or even the flat plains. And no matter where you look here in the Pacific Northwest, you have really gigantic 200-foot tall Douglas firs or a mountain or both. Half the time you can't even see the mountain because there's too many trees. It's wonderful. But you don't have that far horizon unless you go to the ocean, and then it's a very different feeling. And so I really think that there's such a beautiful part of the landscape as you travel through, as you experience Iowa. And Iowa is also a very special place to me. So is Kansas, but Iowa is where I completed my education. I met my now fiance. I met so many lifelong friends. I taught, I performed, it's where I launched my professional career. So it has a lot of just wonderful associations with me in the nature and in the interpersonal relationships. So yeah, I'm so excited for you to share the piece. Thank you for playing it.
I'm so excited to share this with a wider audience.
Yes.
So much of what I'm doing in shared stories is so motivated by place. So with this goal of playing in every county, there's only a fixed kind of population that'll be around. It's based on proximity, usually. There might be some, maybe I'll get super fans that drive around and go to different places, but not holding my breath for that unless they're like related to me, But I love this idea of not being bound by a specific place, the way we're presenting this concert. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is what's available to us now, since we are all streaming because of the pandemic. We can offer this concert to anybody. So thank you so much, Katie. And for anybody watching, please go get your tickets. I'll drop the link in the comments below. You can get your tickets now for Wind and Waves. You will hear Katie play Within a Dome of Sky. You're going to hear Rose Bishop on flute and piccolo, Danielle Kuntz on harp. You're going to hear Christine Hornig on clarinet, and I will be singing as well. All the pieces are about the currents, the wind, the air, the water, and also the emotions that surround us and that shape our experiences. And I think it's going to be such a beautiful night or afternoon, depending on where you are. It's on January 31st, Sunday, 2 o'clock Pacific, which is 4 o'clock Central where you are, and 5 o'clock Eastern. And we can't wait to share this music with you. So thank you, Katie, and thanks to everyone for watching. And we hope to see you there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so great to be able to talk about, my work and also your work and how much I love your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was so great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Katie.